Llafur. I'd like to start by thanking members across the Chamber for the very positive discussions that I've had with colleagues right across all parties in the last few weeks, and some very constructive ideas have come from those discussions, many of which we've used to shape the support that we're now providing to businesses across Wales and to individuals as well. So I want members to know just how very grateful I am for that advice and counsel. Now, there can be no doubt of the scale of the economic challenge that lays ahead of us. The OBR's reference scenario depicts UK GDP falling by 35% in the second quarter of this year. So there is no avoiding a recession. But if we are to avert a major depression, it is absolutely imperative that governments across the UK do everything in their power to shelter business through the storm and protect workers from the very great threat of unemployment. Now, as a Welsh Government, we made a commitment to play our part in that work. It's why we have re-examined our budgets and made tough decisions right across government to put in place a new £500 million economic resilience fund. Our fund provides significant financial support that is additional to that provided by the UK government. It provides vital support for businesses, particularly those small and medium-sized firms that are so critical to the Welsh economy. And that isn't available to firms in England. We've done this because we want to support good businesses in 2019 to be good businesses in 2021. We want to support people who had a good job in 2019 to have a good job in 2021. So last Friday, we opened the application process for the fund. The rate of applications in the days since has been unprecedented. More than 6,000 grant applications were received within just 24 hours of the launch. And as of 6 a.m. this morning, the Economic Resilience Fund has received 5,842 micro-business applications totaling £56.7 million and 2,267 SME applications that have totaled £127.3 million. So overall, the total is 8,109 applications totaling £184 million. I think that demand speaks to the scale of the crisis that we now find ourselves in, and that's why I was pleased on Monday of this week to have responded with pace to release a further £100 million into this current phase of the Economic Resilience Fund. It's worth saying this work builds on the more than £440 million worth of business rate grants that have now reached nearly 35,000 businesses across Wales. Local authorities, however, have worked with urgency and with skill to process payments and are doing a fantastic job getting funding to businesses as quickly as possible. So I'd like to thank every single local authority who has played a part in this work. I'd also like to pay further tribute to the staff at both Business Wales and the Development Bank of Wales, and to my officials who have worked tirelessly, often in difficult personal circumstances, to develop the most comprehensive package of support for businesses anywhere in the UK. Now, we've sought to strike the balance between supporting as many enterprises as possible and making a meaningful contribution to each one's survival. But in doing so, we're not losing sight of our longer term ambitions, the need to decarbonise the Welsh economy, the need to increase the incidence of fair work, and the need to raise the skills levels of individuals across Wales. And that's why we've asked each recipient of our support to sign up to the principles of the economic contract. The fund and the criteria will be reviewed before the next phase is released, and I'd like to welcome, in addition, the action of the UK government in terms of the job retention scheme that is now opened, and I welcome the extension of the scheme as well until at least the end of June. Now, on Monday, the UK government announced a package of support to innovative new companies that are not eligible for existing coronavirus rescue schemes. To qualify, a company must have raised £250,000 or more privately in the last 5 years. It's important, I think, that the UK government monitors progress of the scheme to ensure that this threshold does not deter vibrant and viable businesses from accessing support. In Wales, startups that were established prior to March the 1st of this year will be able to apply for the Economic Resilience Fund if they meet, of course, the eligibility criteria. And this sits alongside the already well-established and high-quality package of pre-COVID support for small businesses that is available through the Development Bank of Wales and, of course, Business Wales's startup loans and comprehensive advice. So while a lot has been done, I also should say that there is still a lot to be done. There is an urgent need to see more of the promised lending guaranteed by the UK government getting to the front line. The UK government must continue to support and press the high street banks to be far more responsive to the needs of our businesses at this incredibly difficult time. I believe that there is a lot that high street banks could learn from our very own Development Bank of Wales in the way that it has adapted to the current period that we're in, making sure that it's adapted its own policies and processes to get funding and support to businesses without delay. So Llywydd, we are all incredibly proud of businesses all over Wales, businesses that are stepping up to support the fight against COVID and to assist our NHS. There's been an overwhelmingly positive response from the business community to our call to action on PPE. Through it, we are now seeing innovative ways of working as businesses switch to making devices and products which will make a huge difference to our health and social care staff. Those currently furloughed or out of work, though, need support too. And that's why on Monday I launched our new e-learning provision aimed at improving skills and supporting mental well-being by helping individuals to prepare positively for the future, whatever that may bring. Through our new offer, we've made available a range of high quality and free online learning resources from trusted providers like the Open University. This provision is supported by online careers advice and guidance available for use by individuals across Wales via the Working Wales website. I now look forward to taking colleagues' questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Russell George. Russell George?
Russell's not been unmuted.
You need to run. There you go.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Minister. Can I thank you for your statement, and can I also thank you for your weekly meetings with opposition spokespeople? I think they're invaluable because they allow us to raise issues directly with you as well as being updated. So that's greatly appreciated, Minister. And can I generally welcome your statement? And I think that the financial assistance being provided by both the UK government and the Welsh government, I think is very good to date. And also, I think it's quite right what the First Minister said earlier today, and that it's important that schemes complement each other from both governments. The Chancellor announced his 250 million future fund for business startups and the tech sector. And I wonder how you are supporting businesses in Wales to attract funding from that particular scheme. And I think it's also important that to take into account the Enterprise Research Centre, which published some data, I think, in the last couple of days, showing that Wales could be the most significantly and hardest hit as a result of the coronavirus and restrictions brought into place. And they provide some detail with that. But clearly, I think you said yourself, Minister, we have a higher percentage of smaller businesses here in Wales, especially in rural Wales. So I think we need to be adapting accordingly. The Economic Resilience Fund was very welcome. From my perspective, I was telling businesses 10 days, 2 weeks ago that were contacting me, please just wait. The Economic Resilience Fund is going to fill those gaps that are left. And I appreciate that any government can't fill all the gaps, but I was expecting more gaps to be filled than was currently the case as announced. But I very much hope that you are going to bring forward further schemes that will support those existing gaps that exist. And I'm particularly thinking of, and I'll go through a few of the gaps now, VAT, for example. businesses that are not registered for VAT. These businesses are small businesses. Most businesses, small businesses in Wales, or a large number of them, are not going to be registered for VAT, currently excluded from the criteria. So it would be good to have confirmation that in the next phase of the scheme that those businesses are going to be serviced. I know Paul Davis raised this with the First Minister earlier on, but First Minister didn't give any detailed answer at that point. There's still the issue of those that are self-employed, sole traders who recently become self-employed aren't able to produce accounts. And there's also the issue of those that haven't been able to put in tax returns yet, or with irregular turnover. And I'm particularly thinking of businesses that may invoice. So they had work in January, February, their invoices went out and they're now being paid in March and April, but they've currently got no work coming in. So they aren't able to meet the criteria that's been set in the current EDF funding for in regards to 40% reduction loss in turnover or profit. Then there's some issues around business rates I hope you can address. I appreciate this crosses over with your colleague, the Finance Minister. But there are many businesses that are excluded, and it does seem to me that there needs to be some degree of tapering or accommodation for this. There are businesses, for example, that are with a rateable value of £12,500 that are excluded, whilst businesses with a rateable value just a little bit less are receiving £10,000 in grant money. And there are businesses in the hospitality sector, for example, perhaps rateable value. I know one with a 53,000 rating that's not able to receive any funding at all, whilst business with just a rateable value of £49,000 odd would receive £25,000 grant funding. So what degree of tapering might come forward in future Welsh Government initiatives on business rate relief? On business rate reliefs as well, I'm very pleased that the Welsh Government got the money out to local authorities quickly, but there is some differences between local authorities and how they are delivering the fundings direct to businesses, unfortunately. Some local authorities are doing well, such as Powys County Council in my own area, got the money out very, very quickly. So very much commend that. But some local authorities are just not getting that money out, and the systems are far more bureaucratic. The tourism sector, I know it's been mentioned earlier today, but significant downturn in this particular sector, and I wonder what further government support you can confirm that will come forward to support this particular sector, obviously very crucial, and also businesses that have a seasonal turnover as well. Especially some that need to demonstrate a loss in profit. Clearly, some won't be able to do that because of the seasonal nature. Also, coming to the end, the recovery phase, if you could just confirm that the Economic Resilience Fund is just for the here and now, or is it for the longer term? Because I assume it's just for the here and now, and that the government's going to come forward with a further larger package in terms of how we move beyond the current phase and we get support out to help businesses change their business models, innovate through technology, etc. And finally, the Development Bank for Wales, very pleased that they got loans out quickly to people. It's a good news story that perhaps to a degree that all businesses, well, many businesses have been supported, but of course the funds have dried up. So what other additional funds can the Welsh Government lever in itself through its own resources, or the UK Government, or European funding as well?
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I thank Russell George both for his kind remarks at the beginning and for the questions that he's asked. I think the way that you, Russell, Helen, Mary, David and I have been able to work over the last month shows that you can operate in a collegiate way across political parties without losing strong scrutiny of government as well. So I am very grateful for the way that we've been able to work together in assessing what is best for the country. In terms of the questions that have been asked, I'll try to run through them in the order that they were asked. First of all, the Future Fund, the fund that was announced for startups. I've already said that there is a difficulty within the criteria for Welsh startups regarding the requirement to have raised £250,000 privately in the last 5 years. And on top of that, of course, any money put in by the UK government has to be matched by private investors. But if the money isn't repaid, then the UK government will take an ownership stake in the company. I know that the government has reviewed the CBILS scheme. I'm hopeful that it is monitoring very closely how effective this particular scheme is as well, and that should it transpire that further revisions are required here, that it will make necessary changes in order to assist businesses across the country, because at the moment there is a risk that it would benefit primarily those in London. It has to be said, though, that there are other alternatives that I'm pressing UK government ministers to consider, including using the existing R&D tax relief regime to bring forward the payment of significant sums of money. The money is already in the system, but it could be advanced sooner to support businesses. It's worth saying that startups that were established prior to the 1st of March 2020 can apply for the Economic Resilience Fund if they meet the criteria. So that support is available to them, and that's additional, of course, over what businesses, startups would have in England. And the Development Bank itself operates at least 2 specific funds to assist with startups and within a specific sector, tech startups. Now, in terms of the ERF, you are right to assume that this particular fund is for the rescue stage. And as we now look at resetting the economy and recovering from COVID-19, we'll look at the most appropriate means of supporting businesses moving forward. That second phase of that tranche of £100 million will enable us to look at some of the remaining gaps, and you've highlighted a number of them. One of the biggest gaps that has occupied our thinking is the non-registered, VAT-registered micro business. Now, the reason that we built in that particular piece of criteria into phase 1 of the RF was to avoid significant fraud, because it enabled us to check the address of a business, the existence of a business. Moving forward, the Scottish Government have introduced a model that we were considering, which is essentially a bursary. That might be the option that we settle on, but one thing is for sure, we wish to address that particular segment of the economy. In terms of sole traders that have recently taken up employment and some of the other gaps that Russell George highlighted, in many respects, these are welfare matters that may require the attention of officials who are concerned with the Discretionary Assistance Fund. And across departments, we're looking at how we can utilise an enhanced Discretionary Assistance Fund for the purpose of filling in some of these gaps. We had to set cut-offs at some point in terms of the level of grants that businesses would receive. In terms of tapering rates relief in the future, is something that I'll certainly be discussing with my colleagues, principally the Finance Minister. And I'd share Russell George's congratulations of Powys Council, who have, I think, consistently week on week been at the front of getting grants out to businesses. In the first few days, I think within the first week, they managed to administer 2,000 grants, which was very impressive. The UK government has indicated that it will be publishing all of the English Council's performance, and given that that is likely to happen very soon across the border, I think it makes sense that we consider it here. But I've also asked UK government to publish, if you like, a league table for the high street banks in regard to the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, so that we can check which of the banks really are stepping up and which are failing their customers. The next stage of the Development Bank of Wales COVID-19 loan scheme could attract money from UK government. We've certainly asked for it, and the Development Bank itself has applied to become a CBILS lender. That would provide a huge opportunity in terms of being able to provide more money sooner to Welsh businesses. It's quite a staggering fact that the Development Bank of Wales, in contrast to what's happening with CBILS, has assured us that it will be able to get money out of the door for all of the successful applicants by the end of this month. That's a pretty impressive achievement if they are able to deliver on that. There will be, as we consider the reset and recovery, there will be huge opportunities. Of course, certain sectors will contract, certain sectors will change considerably, but there will also be many opportunities, and we wish to make sure that we've got the support mechanisms. A huge amount of thought at the moment going into this concerning how we can embrace and exploit emerging opportunities that will be driven largely by behavioural change. Russell George has identified one particular sector that will require a lengthier period of support, that being the visitor economy. I've already taken up with UK government ministers the concern of the tourism sector and other sectors and subsectors that will likely require further support in the months ahead, particularly in regard to the job retention scheme. I'm also aware of many conversations that have taken place that are involving the Deputy Minister for Culture, Sport and Tourism on a UK basis to examine what sector-wide support may be offered across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There is a need, I think, once we begin to emerge from coronavirus, to consider what protocols as well need to be introduced in order to safely resume the visitor economy across Wales. Those protocols, if they were to be certified, could give assurance to customers and to visitors that businesses are complying with post-COVID-19 requirements in order to operate successfully. And I think that's the safest way to resume activities in this important sector.
Thank you. Helen Mary Jones.
Deputy Llywydd, and can I begin by echoing what Russell George has said and thanking the Minister and indeed his staff, who have been very responsive to specific concerns that myself and my colleagues have raised, and also are very open to new ideas and new suggestions. I would submit that this is a very positive model for the way in which a government ought to be engaging with constructive opposition at this time, and I really appreciate the Minister for making sure that that's happened. If I may just briefly raise some specific issues. I was very pleased to hear the Minister say that the Economic Resilience Fund, he's very conscious that it doesn't meet all the businesses he'd like it to, particularly those businesses that don't register for VAT. I'm very pleased to hear him say that that will be kept under review. I wonder if the Minister can give us an indication today about when that might be able to happen, because as I'm sure I know he's aware, those very small businesses are ones who may have less put by, they may be more vulnerable, and arguably may need help more quickly than larger businesses that might have more robust relationships with their banks. Speaking of banks, I want to particularly welcome what the Minister has said about, or as it were, a league table for the high street banks, about those who are being helpful and those who are not. I'd say more broadly, I think that the people of Wales will remember those big businesses that have conducted themselves well, and they will remember those that have not. And I'm sure the Minister will agree with me about that. In his statement, the Minister mentions the UK government's furlough scheme, the job retention scheme, and I know that we're all very pleased that that's in place. But the Minister is aware that there are some issues and there are some gaps, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that he's given me to provide him with some evidence about particularly those people who are left behind because they've changed employment at this time. Their previous employers won't furlough them, sometimes perhaps because they left in not a very, without leaving a positive relationship, and new employers who would wish to do so. I wonder if the Minister can update us this afternoon about the discussions that I know have been having with the UK government about this, and whether he feels that there is a possibility that now the main scheme is in place, the most obvious evidence being payroll, that there is any possibility of flexibility. And finally, the Minister has acknowledged in his responses to Russell George that there are still some gaps, and I would say in this context that when you're making these big steps so quickly, there will be gaps. I don't think anybody is surprised in that. Now, when the First Minister was questioned about related issues and thinking about where the gaps are and how they were to be filled, the First Minister talked about pressing the UK government to fill those gaps, and I'm sure none of us would disagree with that. And we all acknowledge, of course, the limited resources available to the Welsh Government. But in the past, the Minister has said, and I think he has said really this afternoon in response to Russell George, that he will look to plug some of those gaps with Wales-only schemes if he has to. I was interested to hear him again refer to the assistance fund, the discretionary assistance fund, and I wonder whether he can give some further consideration to using that fund to provide an emergency basic income to some of those people who will be falling through the gaps because we can't make the schemes for everybody, and when he thinks he will have an assessment of how many businesses and how many individual sole traders are falling through the gaps and how soon a new scheme might be able to be in place to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I thank Helen Mary Jones again for a very kind and generous comments and for the questions asked. We certainly don't have a monopoly of ideas within Welsh Government. We are seeking views, ideas and innovation from far and wide, and I've got to say we have had a lot of constructive ideas from members across the chamber, and I'm incredibly grateful to Helen Mary for those ideas and the intelligence as well that that she and her office have been able to provide during this time. Just reflecting on the group of individuals and small businesses that have fallen through the gap regarding VAT registration. My aim is to detail phase 2 of the ERF in the coming 10 days to 2 weeks, so that we can essentially have a seamless movement from ERF phase 1 into phase 2, recognising that the current phase with a requirement of, or an application total of over £180 million will not last a significant length of time beyond today. So I do not wish to have a gap between phase 1 and phase 2 if it can be avoided. And I think you're absolutely right regarding the performance of high street banks. Memories will live very long from this experience, and people will judge and then make decisions on the basis of the performance of high street banks and others. And I do think it's right that the UK government, if it's choosing to publish, if you like, a league table for local authority performance in England, then it also does the same with the banks. It's only fair, in my view, that should be applied. In terms of furlough, and the reason I raise furlough is because, Helen Mary, you've identified a group of individuals who have fallen through the crack in terms of the cut-off date. We've been supported by the Scottish Government in our call for the date to be pushed back to April the 1st. That would also capture a significant number of people who are seasonal workers within the visitor economy. I have to say, you know, the discussions that I have with ministers in UK government are always very amicable, constructive. They're open to our ideas, and indeed, they've been able to announce changes to certain support packages based on our recommendations, based on the intelligence that we've been getting. So they're currently considering that further extension to April the 1st. The quad call took place this afternoon during plenary. I wasn't able to be on it, so my colleague Lee Waters took my place. If there is any news about a possible extension to furlough that has come about as a consequence of that call, I'll make sure that that information is shared with members. Now, I just want to pick up on the question about to what extent we should be plugging gaps left by UK government activities. There is only so much we can do with our finite resource. The UK government really needs to be seen as the government that has the extraordinarily deep pockets that we do not have. But that's not to say that we can't intervene in a Wales-only way. That's precisely what we did with the £500 million Economy Resilience Fund. Now, normally we spend through the Business and Regions Division of Government, business support and investment, about £30 million a year. So I do think that £500 million, £500 million demonstrates the scale of what we've done. But I think when it comes to support such as an emergency basic income scheme, that would be incredibly expensive, probably unaffordable for the Welsh government. Certainly given the commitments we've already made, trying to find the quantum of money that would be required for that would be nigh on impossible. But it is something that we have said the UK government should most certainly be considered. We're looking at how we can use the discretionary assistance fund to support more people. Demand for the DAF at the moment is quite incredible. So even if we were to significantly increase the amount of money that's available through the DAF, it will not replicate, it will not offer what an alternative emergency basic income scheme would offer, and that's why we've been pretty consistent and clear in saying to UK government, look, you can introduce this emergency scheme. It can be time limited, but it will make a massive difference to very, very vulnerable people who are currently falling through the gaps.
Thank you. Mike Hedges.
Deputy, you got me? Yeah. To your Deputy Llafur. I mean, I'm being contacted by sole traders, driving instructors, photographers, plumbers, whose work has just ended, and they've made inquiries, and they've been told there is no support for them within the current system. Is that correct? And if it is not correct, can you ask whoever's giving that information out to tell them what support there is for them? Because these are people who've just lost the whole of their income. The second point I'd like to raise is about having a strategy for each economic sector. If I look at retail, for example, there are some companies who've never had it so good. Online retailers, food retailers who don't have to have any special offers. They're just on a queue forming outside. They've never had it so good. It's like Christmas every week. Whereas you've got other retailers who are doing no retail whatsoever. We're seeing one major retailer failing each week, and I expect there to be far more than that of local retailers who just will not be able to reopen. I mean, is there anything that can be done to support some of these smaller retailers who have still got, if we know their rates have gone, they've still got their rent, they've still got the other overhead, there's all these payments they've got to make in order to just keep their building.
Minister.
Can I thank Mike Hedges for his contribution? I think in terms of support for those who have just recently found they've got a massive fall in their turnover as a consequence of their income, as a consequence of coronavirus, they can check their eligibility through Business Wales, the online portal for the Economic Resilience Fund. There's also the support from UK government for the self-employed. I can't comment on each and every sector at this time, and each and every business that may find themselves struggling to identify whether there is support available. The best way for a business to do that, for sure, is to go to the Business Wales website and to look at the various schemes that are available there, and specifically with regard to the ERF, which is linked, the criteria is linked to significant reductions in turnover. There is an eligibility tool that is very simple. Sole trader could go through it in a matter of minutes and will be able to ascertain whether they'd be eligible for that support or any other support that Business Wales is providing advice on. And in terms of the retail sector, this is another sector that in all likelihood will require a lengthier period of support from governments. There is no doubt whatsoever, though, that because of behaviour change that's going to be inspired by this period, that there will be a further acceleration of the shift towards a lot of online retail. That will have knock-on effects for the nature of the high street, what a town centre is actually going to be for in the years to come. So work is underway in the Housing and Local Government Department concerning the town centre first approach and how we can reshape town centres against this new pressure of coronavirus and the likely impact it will have on long-term consumer trends. That said, we are also working on the retail sector. Specifically, this is work in North Wales where we've drawn together local authorities, the Economic Ambitions Board, the retail sector itself and Welsh Government on a piece of work that has 3 strands to it and includes the future of the high street, I would certainly consider extending this piece of work to the other 3 regions of Wales, because I think it's going to be a vital concern for local authorities, for Welsh Government and for the sector.
Thank you. David Rowlands. Can somebody unmute Mr. Rowlands' mic?
Okay, I've done it myself. Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Minister, for your statement this afternoon. But also, can I thank you for the regular weekly updates we get as spokesperson, which are very comprehensive and, in fact, leave very little wriggle room for questions, if I can say that. But can I also say that I think that many of the agencies you're using for the interventions, particularly local authorities and the Development Bank for Wales in particular, can we all thank them for the tremendous work they are doing. It's without doubt they are stepping up to the plate. I would like to reiterate quite a few things that Helen Mary Jones and Russell George says with regard to the ability of certain sectors to access funds. It's very difficult to know exactly where the gaps are, and we appreciate that. And also the fact that we have to remember that this is public money, and that there must be safeguards with regard to the scrutiny of people applying for those funds. So we realise that there may be delays in those funds coming through. But one of the areas that I want to specifically ask about is the construction industry, which there seems to be a very mixed bag of what's going on in the construction industry. And for instance, what is happening on the A465 at this moment? Is there still progress going on there, or are the works closed down? And is what's coming back to you from the construction industry with regard to what's happening with the COVID-19 crisis?
Thank you.
Minister? Can I thank David Rowlands, Deputy Presiding Officer, for his questions, and again for his kind comments too regarding the discussions that we've had and the contributions that members across all parties have made in our fight against coronavirus. I'll certainly pass on his thanks, which I'm sure are reflected across the chamber, to local authorities, to the Development Bank and to Business Wales. The pressure that people within those organisations are under is quite incredible, and often they are forgotten. Equally, civil servants, the pressure that they're under is just incredibly intense right now, and again, they are often not remembered amongst the applause for critical workers, but they really are doing their utmost to keep people safe and to keep our economy as healthy as it can be. It's worth saying actually that the Business Wales website is getting around about 500,000 hits a week at the moment. It's quite incredible, the traffic to that site, and their staff are taking around about 250 to 300 calls each day. A really good committed team of over 40 people who are showing incredible compassion for people who are really stressed and anxious at the moment, trying to keep their businesses afloat. Just moving on to how we spend the money, of course, you're right. We have to be concerned with fraudulent attempts to extract public money from the Welsh Government. And I've highlighted one particular area of support that had the criteria set in a way that would prevent fraudulent applications being made. It was the non-VAT registered group that unfortunately suffered as a consequence, but who we aim to be assisting in phase 2. But then there's the additional question of what sort of value over and above keeping that company alive, keeping those people in employment, we're actually getting for the investment. Well, I'm pleased that we've been able to introduce the economic contract into the grants process. We want to make sure we get maximum value for investment. We will be revisiting those businesses in the months to come, ensuring that they can demonstrate how they've been able to decarbonise what they've done in the time since signing the economic contract to improve the health and mental health and skills of the workforce, and how they've grown as well. Because we want to make sure that we invest in those businesses that are viable for the future, that are responsible businesses. I'm going to turn briefly, if I may, to the construction sector. We've been obviously engaged in discussions across all 4 nations regarding construction sites, and in terms of ensuring that advice for workers is as clear and accessible as possible. But the picture, as you've alluded to, David Rowlands, is not 100% clear, and there are currently different interpretations across all 4 nations and amongst the companies, which is not entirely helpful. The regulations that we published with the supplementary guidance, I think, provides probably the clearest guidance anywhere in the UK. And as a consequence of that, I've had discussions with the likes of SECA and the skills bodies representing the construction sector. As a result of that, I think we have seen construction in a number of areas be maintained in order to support the health and economic effort that's underway right now. So, for example, construction at the Grange Hospital is continuing. It's close to completion. That will provide an extra 350 invaluable hospital beds. It's right that that construction project should be completed, the A465 as well. A vital piece of economic infrastructure that will be at the heart of the regional economy and the resurgence from coronavirus in the years to come. Other projects such as the Carnarvon to Bontnewydd bypass as well, we wish to see delivered in the time frame that it was meant to be delivered, because it is of such importance to communities and to the local economy. However, that guidance must be adhered to at all times on construction sites. I think it's also fair to say that construction will play a pivotal role in the recovery phase. We know that investment in infrastructure can provide the fastest way to grow an economy out of a recession, and we are now facing a recession. And so we're looking at how we can use not just large-scale construction projects, but often smaller scale projects that benefit supply chains a little more, in order to maintain work now, but also to expand employment opportunities as soon as we can once we're through this virus.
Thank you very much. Can I just put the usual statement out that we've had a major speaker from each of the parties? So can the rest of you just ask your questions? We've got a number of people who want to ask the questions of the Minister for Economy. So it's really down to you. So as to how many I can call. Nick Ramsay.
Llafur, and can I concur with previous sentiments that we're thinking of those on the front line at the moment in our public services, and I know that the Minister for Economy has stated that as well. If I could ask a couple of questions about the economy specifically, then Transport Minister. First of all, a number of speakers, including Russ George, have spoken about the problem of some businesses that feel that they're falling through the gaps, as it were. One of those that I spoke to recently, one business owner, is concerned that that if you qualify for rate relief, that can exclude you from the resilience fund, and you can go around in circles. So I wonder if you could clarify the situation there. Also, I've been contacted by the owner of a soft play centre in Abergavenny only today. And she's had concerns about the criteria for applying for emergency funding, on the basis that I think you either have to be hospitality or leisure, and her business fits into neither of those. In fact, it probably fits into both, and clearly a soft play centre, it may be something that isn't seen as important as other facilities at certain points in time. But of course, parents, children, when we come out of this problem time that we're in, those people will be relying on it. Parents will be relying on that sort of educational and play experience for their children. So I wonder if you could look again at the categories and those businesses that might not fit strictly into one category. And finally, on the economy, the self-employed. A local businessman again concerned that to be eligible for Welsh Government emergency funding, you have to have an average profit, or I think I'll show an average profit over 3 years. And he was concerned that actually it's the last year which is most specific to him. So I don't know whether you could or ask your officials to look into whether there could be some exceptions made in terms of the profitability of businesses. Secondly, the second area I wanted to just mention briefly was transport and PPS availability. Firstly, public transport. A key worker at the Heath Hospital that I know waited 75 minutes the other night for a bus home. I just wonder what's been done to support the bus industry at this time, particularly when it comes to our key workers and providing them transport back and forth. They are on the front line. And of course, the bus drivers themselves and the staff with Transport Wales, they're on the front line as well. And I wonder whether PPE has been considered for them. I know there are stresses and strains on that at the moment, but that might be something to look at going forward. And the haulage industry, which some speakers have mentioned, and delivery drivers, the Amazon and the like, they're working very hard for companies at the moment, and they are doing probably in many cases keeping the economy moving in terms of people getting their supplies and people getting their shopping. So I just wonder what help is being made available to companies like that to provide adequate protection for their drivers and for their staff. Very finally, Minister, on the issue of social distancing, it's a very difficult thing to achieve on public transport. So I just wonder how you're liaising with Transport for Wales to make sure that when it does come to this, and indeed when we do start coming out of the lockdown, as hopefully we will at some point, that if there are still any social distancing implications in place, then the Transport for Wales and public transport will be given the sort of support and guidance that it needs.
Minister?
Can I thank Nick Ramsay for his questions? I'll turn to the economy questions first of all. And in terms of the inquiries that he's had from a soft play company, I've had an incredible number of inquiries from soft play businesses that have found themselves in a similar position. It is true that they're not classed as leisure or retail or hospitality, and so they weren't able to benefit from the initial round of support. We were aware of this when we developed the ERF, and for the most part, soft play businesses are micro businesses or SMEs. A huge number of them employ no more than 9 people, so they're classed as micro businesses. They are, for the most part, VAT registered. They've suffered, by and large, a fall of 40% or more, and so they are eligible, I believe, for the micro business element of the Economic Resilience Fund. That's certainly where we've been pointing soft play businesses to for appropriate support, and those details are available on Business Wales website. We'll take up the last question that you raised regarding the economy and how we might be able to support people who have been operating for 3 years, but profitability performance has varied quite significantly over those 3 years. I'll ask officials to pick up on that. In terms of transport, we have, of course, provided the bus industry with the hardship fund. After we announced that, UK government made an announcement that essentially ensured that the Scotland, Wales and England were offering the same degree of support to bus operators during this time. But we're obviously, as you can imagine, we're now considering how to support buses as we emerge from coronavirus, how we do, as you've identified, ensure that social distancing on bus services can be maintained, and what sort of support would be required to the sector in order to maintain that, with the inevitable consequence that it has in terms of the hit on the fare box. particularly for those commercially viable routes. That's something that we're actively considering now. I had a conference call with WLGA Transport and Economy leads this morning, and I identified a number of work streams that are taking place at the moment, and it's my intention to work with local authority partners and with the likes of CPT to ensure that we get the appropriate support for the industry in the future, and that we develop a model for local bus services that is fit for the future as well, given that we will probably see behavioural change exist for at least the next 12 months, if not 24 months, which would and could and probably will lead to reduced patronage on bus services. That means that we have to make sure that we bring forward some of the radical ideas that we published in the white paper, so that we're able to address some of the perception issues of bus services in order to try to drive up patronage amongst new customers, new travellers, whilst we see some existing travellers decide not to take buses because of what's happened with coronavirus, because they're fearful of getting too close to other passengers. There are some industry best practice standards that have been developed, for example, cordoning off seats so that nobody sits within close proximity to one another, so that people are kept away from bus drivers. I have heard that for the most part, bus companies themselves have been very responsible in ensuring that drivers are given some protection in the form of hand sanitizers and so forth. Equally though, I have heard of one or two cases where employers have not been as responsible as the industry, and certainly as we would expect. And this is something that's been raised directly with them. We're in very, very close contact, as you can imagine, with Transport for Wales over how we're going to be able to ensure that we can maintain social distancing rules once we start to emerge from coronavirus. That will obviously have an impact in terms of rolling stock provision on the most demanding lines, those lines where capacity is already being reached. This is something that we're considering at the moment, but again, based on the evidence that we've been able to gather, we expect that behavioural change will lead to, at least in the short term, a drop in patronage on our railways. And we're working with TfW Rail Services in assessing how that will impact on the agreement that was reached just a few years ago on the franchise. I think that covers pretty much everything, apart from the important point that Nick Ramsay raised about drivers and how the private sector is also ensuring that that employees are given the protection that they need. Again, there are, anecdotally albeit, there are varying standards that are being adopted by delivery companies. I'm keen to make sure that as we reset the economy, and then as we recover from coronavirus, we develop, and I'll be very, very keen to ensure that the sectors themselves are leading on this, develop clear protocols that can be applied consistently, if possible, across the UK, that will enable a consistent approach to be applied both within the public and the private sector, so that standards in terms of social distancing for the public sector on transport can be applied also to the sort of standards that would need to be met for and on behalf of and by delivery drivers as well.
Thank you. Can I again appeal to members? We're out of time on this statement. I will extend it to get a few more backbenchers in on this.
Apologies.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you recognised. So can we just say short questions, shorter answers, and perhaps I'll get a few more of you in. David Rees.
Thank you, Deputy Llywydd. Minister, can I also thank you for the actions you've taken as a Welsh Government to fill some of the gaps that the UK Government's business support created. And it's important that we manage those businesses that are in those gaps. But as you rightly pointed out, there are still some gaps, and you've answered many questions I would have wanted to raise from my colleagues on those, but I'll stick to just 2 points. One, there are many businesses that were supplying or had clients in the hospitality and leisure industries, but are not directly themselves in those industries. But because their clients are no longer there, they're now losing income, and therefore they're struggling, and they were not included in the rate support or any aspect of the business support. Will you look carefully at those type of businesses to ensure that they're not going to be lost, because they were very productive 2019. They'll need to be there in 2021. We don't want to see those type of businesses being lost as a consequence of their clients being supported, but they're not being supported. That's one. And secondly, clearly, I have a very keen interest in the steel industry, as you know. It appears that there's the CBILS aspect of the UK government also is not including the steel sector in that. Will you meet with the UK government ministers to see what can be done for industries such as Tata and others who are perhaps in the larger sector of the economy, but are struggling again because their clients are not having demand for steel as a consequence of the actions, and they're going to struggle, so they will be needing some support. But again, they fall outside the criteria. So we look at the UK government agenda on that, because that is a business support question on the UK government, but you need to press the case for that sector in Wales.
Thank you. Minister?
Can I thank Rees for his questions? In terms of steel, this is something that is being raised by us on a weekly basis with BEIS. And I'm pleased that during the course of recognising that CBILS was not supporting all businesses and not supporting in particular that missing middle as businesses with turnover of £45 million, revisions were made to enable support to be forthcoming. In addition, the limit of a £25 million loan has been reviewed, and I'm pleased that our call for that to be increased has been agreed to. But we are continually pressing on the UK government to ensure that there is recognition that Tata in particular is in need of support. We will do what we can in the Welsh government to support Tata and its many sites in Wales, but the UK government clearly has a key role in supporting this sector and Tata in particular. And we said to the UK government that on numerous occasions now that an intervention concerning steel can't then just lead to a barnetised share for the Welsh government, because that would lead to nowhere in terms of the size of the steel sector in Wales compared to the UK as a whole. So it needs to be a UK-led initiative to assist that particular sector. And you're right, we are constantly trying to fill gaps. I'm pleased to say that as a result of the Economic Resilience Fund and the other funds that we've been able to deliver, we've been able to support directly almost 1/5 of Welsh businesses now. And that is in addition to the UK government schemes, the job retention scheme, the support for self-employed, that has benefited many, many more. And in terms of the suppliers to the hospitality sector, you're absolutely right, Di. There are a large number of businesses that fell out of the sector categorisation to be able to draw down the initial tranche of support, but through the Economic Resilience Fund, they would be eligible because, of course, if they're a micro business, I'm in no doubt that they've seen their turnover fall by at least 40%. And in all likelihood, if they're supplying predominantly or primarily to the hospitality sector and they're an SME, then they will have seen their turnover down by more than 60%. So the Economic Resilience Fund was designed with those suppliers to those key sectors that have pretty much hibernated in mind.
Thank you. Neil Hamilton.
Deputy Presiding Officer. The Minister said in his statement that whilst a lot has been done, there's still a lot to do, and that's certainly true. The government has effectively put most of the economy into a kind of medically induced coma, and many businesses fear with some justification they're not going to come out of that coma alive. So it's vitally important that we start the gradual process of lifting restrictions as soon as we can and in the smartest way possible, so that we protect the public's health as well as the health of the economy. In Mid and West Wales, we've got huge dependence on farming, tourism, hospitality, etc. A lot of these businesses are going to fall through the gaps which have been mentioned already in the various funds which are available to try to cope with the consequences of the lockdown. Farms, for example, are excluded from the Economic Resilience Fund, as I understand it, because they are almost by definition in receipt of public funded grants through the CAP. And yet we've seen the dairying industry face a 25 to 30% fall in demand for milk. We've seen the livestock sector similarly suffering with high-end, high-value cuts of meat no longer being used by hotels, restaurants, etc.
Yeah.
A lot of these businesses are going to be on the margins, and they can't be helped under the existing schemes. Similarly, I was very disappointed to hear the reason for using the VAT threshold as a qualification for applications for the ERF was due to fraud. There are many, many ways of countering fraud apart from looking at the information which is available to the VAT authorities. And so I hope that that's going to be reconsidered. Let me give you one example of a business which is certainly not fraudulent, but is a micro business. The Penmine Pool bridge, toll bridge near Dolgellau isn't going anywhere, and the people who own the bridge aren't going anywhere either, but they fall through all these gaps because they're not registered for VAT. They're wholly dependent on the income from tourism to keep the bridge going. It's a tourist attraction, and a lot of businesses like that are just going to go out of business unless some help reaches them pretty soon. So I hope that the Minister will take a more flexible view of this in his reconsideration of the existing rules, and in a couple of weeks' time come up with some kind of more flexible discretionary scheme whereby, because we won't cover every possible example in a set of rules, there will be some kind of discretionary mechanism whereby businesses that fall through the gaps can be reconsidered.
Minister?
Can I thank Neil Hamilton for his questions and say that the idea of a bursary would be a discretionary scheme. That's something that we're actively looking at. We've relaxed our attitude to risk, and that includes the risk of fraud in order to get money out of the door as fast as possible to as many as possible. But in terms of the ERF, I've already outlined how there have already been 8,100 and something applications that need to be processed as fast as possible. Ensuring that we do that with the minimum number of fraudulent cases, it made sense to apply the VAT criteria. But we were very clear when we launched ERF Phase 1 that we were also looking at how we can assist in Phase 2 those who are not VAT registered, and we will do that with the second phase. But I would want to make sure that we avoid widespread and significant fraud, because every £10,000 grant that goes to a fraudulent applicant is £10,000 that will not go to a micro businesses that could survive in Wales. So it's absolutely vital that we do get money to proper, decent businesses that do truly exist and not fraudsters. I prefer to use the term hibernation rather than coma, but your point is correct. That's precisely what we're trying to do. We have actively put certain sectors into a state of hibernation, making sure, working with the UK government, making sure that they can survive and that their employees are getting some income during the coronavirus period, and they can then be woken as we deliver a phased emergence from coronavirus. And it's our intention to ensure that that emergence is conducted on the basis of activities and sectors rather than on a place-based or age-related basis. Now, it's worth saying that with regard to farms, well, farms that are diversified and have additional businesses, they can apply for the ERF, but for the reasons that Neil Hamilton has already outlined, farms that have not diversified are not eligible. Now, I'm aware with regard to the dairy sector, having spoken to Callum Wen, having spoken with other businesses that are operating in this sector, I'm aware of the tremendous struggle that is taking place right now. We don't have any drying facilities, as far as I'm aware of, in the UK, so there is concern that milk will be poured away. We're seeing the gate price fall to an incredibly low rate. That's pretty unacceptable in my view, given that dairy farmers are contributing so much to the effort to keep people healthy right now. And so I've raised the plight of the dairy sector on my weekly calls with the Secretary of State for Wales, who shares my concern as well, and also with counterparts across the DAs, and of course with FAYS. I do welcome what was announced last week in terms of competition laws, but of course we are alive to what is a rapidly changing situation, and I'll make representations for the dairy sector in the coming weeks to UK government so that we can get the support that's required for it.
Thank you. Leanne Wood.
I've written to you, Minister, about a number of businesses that have fallen through the gaps that everybody's been talking about in the provision to prevent unemployment and the collapse of businesses as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. One of these businesses doesn't qualify for financial support because it's not VAT registered and from home. Now, the business owner has tried to get finance from a bank in the form of a business interruption loan to keep the business running, but the minimum amount that they say they can lend is £25,000, and that's too much.
Right.
Many other self-employed people have been in touch to say that they can't receive the financial support that's available as well, and income for most of these people now has dried up, and they're surviving on savings if they've got them. Now, these are all cases that have checked against the eligibility criteria. So how can you assist the groups of businesses and individuals that have missed out on this support? Universal income would be one solution to that, but is there something special that you can do for this particular group of people? How can you prevent these many good businesses from going to the wall?
Can I thank Leanne for her questions? I think it's worth saying that one of the specific cases that you outlined would have been eligible for a small loan from the Development Bank of Wales. £25,000 may be too much. The Development Bank of Wales COVID-19 loan scheme offered smaller loans at very favourable interest rates with a year-long holiday. Now, that's been fully subscribed, but as I said previously to earlier questions, the Development Bank is looking at the second phase of a COVID-19 loan fund. So it may well be that the business you highlighted would be eligible for that second phase of support. Of course, there's also the role I've alluded to the high street banks in this regard as well. And it's not just C-bills that the high street banks have access to. They can help their customers, their existing customers, in many, many ways, whether it be with favourable terms on extended overdrafts or favourable terms in terms of loans. It's absolutely vital that high street banks step up to the mark in this regard. And I've already outlined the rationale for not including in phase one of the ERF those businesses that are not VAT registered. And I've given members assurance that this is very, very much at the forefront of our mind as we develop phase two. Leanne is right that in many respects, the support that needs to be offered to people who've fallen through the gap is welfare support. And we accept the Welsh Government, we have a role. The UK Government have a very significant role as well. And I've already mentioned that work is underway to examine the role of the Discretionary Assistance Fund as far as the Welsh Government is concerned.
Thank you. Mohammad Asghar.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Minister, thank you very much for your statement. But my point is, my very good friend, last 2 weeks, he passed away for coronavirus, and his son died this morning. And the second son is already in the ICU in Royal Gwent Hospital. My question to you is, which I still am very surprised that no assembly member has mentioned, the bereaved families in Wales, what is the availability of financial support for those loved ones who are not only their loved ones, but also the breadwinners of the family? What is the financial assistance is available to those families in these days? And second is, I've also involved and in touch with so many businesses who applied to Welsh Development Bank for borrowing. And there is a standard letter coming to those businesses who have already done, involved in business for so many years. They submitted the accounts and everything, and a standard letter is coming to them that they don't meet criteria. There's no contact details for these people to go back and ask them for the criteria. And there's quite a few other questions, Minister, but I think because short of time, I think these two areas I would like you to explain to me for the reason, how can you help them?
Thank you. Minister.
Okay. Thank you, and can I send my deepest sympathies to Mohammad Asghar's friend's family. It's a terrible time at the moment. I've heard many stories of people I work with losing loved ones. So it is a tragic period, and it is very painful for those who are financially stretched. That is precisely what the Discretionary Assistance Fund was set up to help people who cannot afford to make ends meet in ordinary times. But in this period, of course, it is especially difficult. And I know the First Minister took questions earlier today regarding the costs associated with the loss of life for families. I think it's important to note that the DAF is probably the most suitable channel of support for individuals in that position. And then with regard to the standard letter that is being issued, I'm afraid that the standard letters are being issued because of the speed of responses that's required right now, and the need to minimise administration and bureaucracy so that we can ensure that as many people as possible in the Development Bank and Business Wales and Welsh Government and so forth are actually at the front line administering and delivering grants and financial support. Criteria for support should be very transparent to everybody now, whether it's through the Development Bank or whether it's online provided by Business Wales, the coronavirus portal. I would urge you and any businesses that approach you to first of all look at the criteria that is published online, and if there are then subsequent questions that need to be answered, then please do email me.
And finally, Dawn Bowden.
Presiding officer, and I think I'm just down to one point now, Minister, seeing as all the others have been covered. In fact, one on the VAT gap, I think, has been asked by about half a dozen members in different ways. So I'll skip that one and I'll go straight to my point, which is on the business insurance. Now, thank you for writing to me about that just recently, because I understand you're now going to be meeting with the insurance industry to talk to them about that. And while I fully appreciate that regulation of the insurance industry isn't devolved, I'm sure I can't be alone in having businesses contact me about the attitude being taken by insurers, causing significant stress to a number of individuals who thought they had cover. In fact, even their own brokers thought that they had covered, but the insurance companies themselves seem to be taking a different view. It seems to be particularly prevalent in the hospitality sector, but it's not exclusively in that sector. And if I can just give two very brief examples. So one is a business interruption clause in the policy, but then requires a letter from government to say that the business has to close to make that condition valid. I mean, how in reality is government in a position to provide such letters to every company in that situation? I'm not sure. And another example was where a social club had insurance to say that if they had to close due to contagious disease, then they are covered, only to find that that clause doesn't mean a pandemic. So therefore, they're not covered. So can you confirm to us the best ways in which we might be able to help in terms of bringing issues to your attention that might assist you in discussions with the UK government and the insurance industry to ensure that insurance companies are not wriggling their way out of responsibilities and leaving all of the onus on government to help these companies that have paid into insurance policies for many, many years?
Minister?
Okay, can I thank Dawn Bowden for raising concern that a number of politicians have also flagged up with me. You're absolutely right, Dawn, that in some respects, some insurers are trying to find any way possible to avoid paying out on claims. That's not acceptable. You're right that ministers are speaking with the ABI, the Association of British Insurers, this afternoon. That discussion began about 30 minutes ago. I was meant to be part of it. I've asked my colleague Jeremy Miles to chair it. We will report back to members on the outcome of that discussion. But if there are any cases that need to be highlighted to government, there is a specific business COVID-19 email that I'd urge members to pass on to businesses. It is quite simply business.covid-19@gov.wales. And you're right, businesses, particularly in the events sector, are finding that their insurance policies were not detailed enough, that they didn't get sufficient cover to ensure that they could apply for a successful claim in the event of a pandemic of this type. The problem that I personally have with insurance businesses in this regard is that sometimes the small print is too small to be read, and some glaring holes that should be flagged up with customers as they are purchasing their insurance policies are not highlighted to them. I think there is a role in the insurance industry to offer more transparent means of sharing information or sharing vital information with their customers.
Thank you very much, Minister. And my apologies to those of you who'd indicated that you would want to have asked questions, but I have extended the time significantly on this statement.